Episode 1, January 1st, 2018. The HistoryPad presents Napoleon Bonaparte, History of an Emperor. The rich history of Napoleon Bonaparte actually had very humble beginnings. In the small island of Corsica in 1769, on August the 15th, Napoleon Bonaparte was brought into the world. He was the second of 8 children In that same year that Napoleon was born, the island was invaded by the French, actually, and the French occupied it until he was old enough to go to school. And so he became a French civilian and went to school in France at the military school there, and went very early to what I would consider, but he graduated by the time he was 16 in 1785 on October 28th. And he graduated as an officer, actually, with the rank of second lieutenant in the artillery, which is pretty amazing. Actually, at the age of 16, he comes out, and he had this strong artillery background that continued with him throughout his entire career and throughout his entire life. And it shows in just about 8 years later, so he's about 24 here. 1793, December 22nd, he's awarded for winning the Battle of Toulon. It was an internal French battle, and he wins that battle by taking his artillery up to the top of a little hill and shooting down on the rebellion. And even though he was a subordinate and he wasn't even exactly allowed to run around and make moves like that, they still credited him with the win. Rank of brigadier general right after that battle. And then he's imprisoned because he's accused of being a Jacobin, and he kind of was a supporter, but how he wins over the support again because he decides he has to make a big move and show that he can be what is needed to be so he can move up in power, is during the 13th of Vendemiaire. He comes up as the commander of the interior at that point in time, because he sets up his artillery cannons in such a way that he mows down 600 people. I want to say it was 600 royalists in the middle of the streets, just killed them all on his own with just his artillery. So he was pretty big deal at that point. And a guy named Paul Barras pushes him along and talks him up and everything. And then Napoleon steals the guy's wife. He meets his wife, Josephine, who's actually with Barras at the time. And Napoleon steals Josephine at that time. And he's given the command over Italy right after that in 1796, moving quickly along to March 2nd, 1796, and boom, he's given the command over Italy. He's given the command over the French force. And in Italy, he begins the campaign against the Austrians. And that campaign goes perfectly for Napoleon. He does great in that campaign. He shows that he's a seasoned war veteran at this point in time, and that he's a military mind that honestly can't be rivaled at that point in time, and probably not any point in time before. He's a fucking hero. Everyone knows who he is. He's a household name. All of Europe is kind of very, very nervous, because they believe that Napoleon's going to do what Napoleon does and just walk through all of Europe and take over. And at that point in time, he starts up another campaign, and he takes 38,000 down into Egypt, and he starts the Egyptian campaign because he wanted to hurt Great Britain, because Great Britain was standing in the way of France very much, but he knew that he couldn't beat back Great Britain and take over all of Europe at that point in time. But Great Britain is very strong, and the British Navy there's no rival at this point, and he knows that if he goes in the water, he's going to get fucking destroyed. So he went straight through Egypt, and so he decides that he's going to go down to Egypt and take over, and he begins his Egyptian campaign with 38,000 people. Goes down, he wins the Battle of the Pyramids against the Mamluks in Egypt, which is an amazing win, actually, because he starts a whole new defense, actually, a defensive standard called the square. And at this time, the Muliks have been in reign for over 1,000 years. They've never been beaten. They're Battle of the Pyramids, and he kills 25,000. And I mean, by any standard, that's a huge win. And the Mamluks run away from him, actually. And he takes Cairo. He takes Cairo right after that. But at the same time, Admiral Nelson had been coming down with his British fleet to try to intercept Napoleon, and he does. And he corners Napoleon, and he keeps Napoleon cut off from supplies and communications. For the victor, he finally turns from Ottoman. He decides he can't take Syria, because he can't. He's getting beat up. And he turns and he leaves and comes back up to France, and at that time decides to overthrow the directory and start a coup. And so now we fast forward all the way at 1800, and he's the first consul of the consulate, which means he's the president pretty much. And he escapes an assassination attempt valiantly. And he starts the Legion of Honor. He writes the new constitution. He writes the Napoleonic laws. And he sells Louisiana to the United States, the Louisiana Territory, for $15 million. And we absolutely love him. He drafted what became our Bill of Rights, actually, with the Napoleon Code, which was the introduction of the Civil Code. He writes that in, which is freedom of religion, freedom of speech. He crowns himself emperor. He overcomes the Pope. He overcomes all of the rest of Europe except for Great Britain. Great Britain is like his thorn in the side, and Great Britain actually declares war on France finally in 1803. 1804 he proclaims himself to be the emperor, and he's the emperor over almost all of Europe. Thanks for watching the History Pad. This was our very first episode. Obviously it was on Napoleon Bonaparte. Part 2 is coming up really quickly, so make sure you subscribe and you like and you hit your notification button so that you can see the next video that's coming up, Part 2 of Napoleon Bonaparte. Thanks everybody.